One of the most prominent eras in our history was the Viking era. The mighty Vikings were dominant for the late 800 AD until the middle of the 11th century. This is a long time, therefore the Viking era had a significant impact on our world, which was both good and bad. Many people have the wrong impression of Vikings. Sure, they were big and bearded and prone to violence, but they were also revolutionary. In this video, we'll take a look at what the Vikings were really like. Stick around for the full video to see how Vikings helped create the world we live in today. Facts First presents, Did the Vikings Find America First? 22 Vicious Viking Facts. Be sure to click the like button if you're excited to learn more about the Vikings, and while you're at it, subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell to stay up to date with everything from Facts First. Men, women, and children. When we think of Vikings, we think of a red-headed, bearded man waving a battle hammer over his head. This is accurate for most men, but there were also women and children Vikings. This is just something we don't see often. What's in a name? The Vikings didn't call themselves Vikings. Even though they've been called this for centuries, it didn't appear in the history books until the middle of the reign during the 10th century. The Norse origins of the word Viking could stem from the feminine variation of the Old Norse word Vik, which means small bay. The name could also originate from a region in Norway called Viken, which is where many of the Vikings lived. How it all got started. Not too many people know how the Viking era got started. It all began on June 8, 793, which was the day that the Viking warriors got in their boats to travel from Norway to the shores of Lindisfarne, northern England. The residents were willing to welcome their visitors with open arms, but the Vikings had a different idea. They destroyed the abbey of the locals and then killed most of the people on the island before claiming it for themselves. This event encouraged the raids that went on for quite a while. Why were they so violent? Historians and researchers don't know why the Vikings were so violent when they went to northern England, but they do have theories. One theory is that they were desperately trying to escape poverty and famine in their home country and were willing to do whatever it took to find a new home. Others believe they just wanted to get rid of the locals to claim northern England as their own. What's up with the horned helmets? If you've ever seen Vikings in movies or in books, you know that they wear horned helmets. The problem with this is that there's no evidence they ever wore these helmets. These helmets would have been detrimental in battle, but this didn't stop someone from linking helmets to the warriors back in the 19th century. Handsome Vikings. Marvel Comics got the look of the Vikings right when they cast Chris Hemsworth as Thor. Chris is handsome, muscular, and has long blonde hair and a beard. The real Vikings cared a lot about their appearance, and many had long blonde hair. Those that had brown hair would use lye to dye their hair and beards blonde. Not only did the lye change the color of their hair, but it also killed lice, which was very common back then. Brutal punishments. Vikings are known for their brutal warrior tactics and their love of bloodshed. While there isn't much evidence of this, people believe that it's true. They were known to punish criminals and felons with a punishment called the blood eagle. This punishment involved breaking open the victim's back and cracking their ribs one at a time. After, they would pour salt into the victim and let nature take its course. There's no evidence to back this up, and you can only hope that it isn't true because it sounds horrible. Soft spot for the ladies. Women have come a long way over the years. Even though we're living in the 21st century, women still have a ways to go. The Viking women were better off than women have been through history. Even though they lived in a society that was dominated by big, muscular men, women had a lot of freedom. They could go on cross-country explorations in longboats. They were allowed to buy and own their own land, and they could divorce their husbands if they wanted to. The Vikings may have been violent warriors, but they did have a soft spot for the ladies. The Vikings cared a lot about personal hygiene. You'd think that between the hours of drinking and killing that the Vikings would be a mess. This is not the case. They cared a lot about personal hygiene. They took more than 2 baths a week, and they had items that resemble things we use today, like tweezers, razors, hair combs, and Q-tips. Vikings and slaves. Vikings were bloodthirsty people who killed anyone who got in their way. What people don't know is that they were fair, generous, and lived in society ahead of its time. The Vikings also took part in slave trades. The Vikings would take men, women, and children from the European Isles, and they were sold. The Vikings didn't sell the slaves randomly. Instead, they took them to huge slave markets throughout the Middle East and Europe. Global warming during the Viking era. We all know that global warming is a huge issue affecting our planet, even though certain leaders refuse to believe it. Global warming isn't something new. From 950 to 1250, the planet experienced what is known as the medieval warm period. This was a very beneficial time for the Vikings. They were able to travel to new countries that would usually be covered in ice and snow, like Newfoundland. Today, global warming is not considered a blessing like it once was. It's what could cause detrimental damage to our planet. Traveling around the globe. Vikings loved their longboats. They traveled in these boats to new lands. Many people believe that they only traveled to the British Isles and nearby European places. However, there's evidence that the Vikings went to other places, including Israel, Baghdad, and North Africa. Vikings in Russia. Vikings didn't just occupy England and France. They also had a significant impact on Russia. The Vikings were the first settlers in Russia. They lived on the land for many years until the Russian people arrived and turned Russia into a Slavic community. The Great Heathen Army. The Vikings were known for raids. After raiding Ireland, England, and Scotland, they just went home. This makes the raids pretty pointless. In 865, an army of Vikings called the Great Heathen Army sailed their longboats to the north of England and took over the city of York. They overpowered the residents and lived on their land as farmers for 13 years before becoming overpowered themselves. They deserved it since they were doing the same thing. Most think that this is karma. The mighty King CNUT. The Vikings weren't picky when it came to the European countries they conquered, but they had a soft spot for England. This is why England was so affected by their reign. After many Viking conquests, the Danish people and English society signed a treaty that would unite parts of England through Danelaw. Later, King Canute of Denmark created the North Sea Empire, and he became ruler of England, Norway, and Denmark. His rule lasted until 1066. Viking land in France. When the Vikings realized they could conquer any area they liked, they stopped discriminating against other European countries, so they added France. The Vikings settled on the northern coast of France, which they named the Land of Northmen. Today, we know this area as Normandy. As time passed, the Vikings in Normandy changed their old way of life and became known as the Normans. Since you can't teach an old dog new tricks, the Normans later started invading areas again, including Belgium and other territories in France. They were bold enough to travel the English Channel to invade England, which resulted in a bloody battle we can read about in history books today. Making Iceland their own. The Vikings had a clear picture of where they were going and how they were going to plan the invasion. They may have seemed like savages, but they were very organized. They were master map readers, and they made to-do lists. Like everyone, they also made mistakes. One of these mistakes helped them find Iceland. The Vikings discovered the island of Iceland in 830 after taking a wrong turn on the way to the Faroe Islands. They returned home to get more men, and they took over Iceland, and eventually many Vikings settled in the country. The Vikings discovered America. Christopher Columbus was given credit for discovering America, but many researchers disagree. There's evidence that the Vikings set foot on North American soil 40 years before Columbus set sail to the free world. By this point, the Vikings had already come and gone. The Vikings lived in North America for a few years after discovering that the Native Americans were no match for their weapons. Eventually, they moved on to Newfoundland and Canada. The story of the MAINE penny. It's hard to imagine, but the Vikings did get along with others. There's actually evidence of this. The evidence points to the Vikings, Native Americans, and the Inuits being engaged in communication and trade. The evidence to support this was the discovery of the MAINE penny, which was found in Maine. The coin was used in Norway during the early 11th century. Evidence suggests there was peace within the groups. All trade communication ceased when they started getting on each other's nerves. Viking social classes. Today we have social classes. We have the working class, the middle class, and the upper class. The Vikings had their own social classes as early as the 9th century. The top of the social class was the jarls, who were made up of nobles, wealthy merchants, and priests. Next was the carls, who were farmers, builders, and ordinary people. The lowest social class were the slaves. This is proof that social classes isn't a modern thing. Norse mythology. When you think of Vikings, you think of Norse mythology. Even though the Viking era ended a long time ago, the Norse culture is popular today. The Vikings had their remarkable heroes, goddesses, and gods. Over time, the legends of Thor, Loki, Odin, and Freyja were in Norse Germanic tribes and became folklore tales. These stories helped create Thor and other modern stories. The Vikings loved their food. Scandinavian cuisine is a lot different than in most parts of the world. The Vikings needed a lot of energy to invade and pillage. Their delicacies included meat, bread, seafood, fresh fruit, and fresh vegetables. They also had techniques for preserving their food. One example is hanging their fish and letting it dry for months to get the perfect taste. That wraps up all of our Viking facts. Now we'd like to hear from you. Do you think you could have lived in the time of the Vikings? Or are you thankful to be alive in today's time instead? Let us know in the comments. And before you leave this video, make sure to click the like button and subscribe to Facts Verse for more great videos.